Nuremberg. So I saw this movie like a month ago, and I don't remember all the details, but I got a good idea what happened. I got my notes too. It's a lot of dialogue. It's a lot of talking. Some of it's in German, and they would show the translation on the screen when the guy was speaking German. A lot of these guys' names I don't know how to pronounce. Well, most of them I don't know how to pronounce. So I just refer to them as their rank. And so like the second in command from Hitler, I just call him H2, and then in the third in command I call him H3, and so on. So the movie is about when after Hitler died, and then you still had the vice president or the third Reich, whatever the hell they call themselves. You know, this the hierarchy of the Nazis, all of them were still alive. Hitler was the only one that died. As far as like the high command of Nazis after the war, whatever. So it was an interesting movie. That's one thing you'll until the world ends, you'll never the Jews will never stop talking about Hitler and Nazis. And black people, black Americans will never stop talking about slavery. That's 200 years from now, they're still gonna be making movies about Hitler and the Nazis, and black people are still gonna be talking about slavery. That's two things people are never gonna stop talking about. But this movie was interesting because usually people just talk about Hitler, but this was focused on the other people that because Hitler wasn't a one man show. He had his support. His government and all different people like that. And people really don't talk about that too much. They always just say Hitler. So the beginning of the movie, it starts off with the soldiers, the American soldiers. They're in Austria, and a car pulls up, and H2 jumps out, the second in command from Hitler, and he says something in German, and then the American translator, he asks him what he said, and then the H2, I don't even know how to pronounce his name. I'm just gonna call him H2, the second under from Hitler. So H2, he said, "Get my luggage," and they took him in, they arrested him. So the American president, already ordered to kill all these guys. I don't know why they didn't just shoot him and kill him on the spot right anyway, but so they arrested him, took him in, and one of the lawyers or one of the Americans wanted to take him to trial because before World War II, World War One was like 20 years before, and people had problems with the Germans before World War II, 20 years later. So they wanted to take it to trial and I guess discourage them from continuing on, whatever the Germans was trying to do, whatever. So they hired a psychiatrist, and the main reason they hired the psychiatrist, the American army, they wanted to make sure none of them was going to commit suicide so they could take them to trial and prove they were evil. Um, and there it was no is what they were doing, it was never done before at that point as far as like international law or whatever. So they made a tribunal with United States, Britain, France, and Russia, and they had to have Russia part of it. It wasn't gonna work without Russia. This is what they was talking about in the movie, and of course Britain was gonna be on board in France, but Russia, that was the last person to join the tribunal. So they put together all these lawyers and all that, but the American lawyer, he was the chief justice or whatever, the lead attorney or whatever. So when they had captured H2 Hitler second, he had $500,000 on him, some jewelry, had his wife and his children with him, and they confiscated his money and all his property or whatever. And his wife and his daughter, they let go at first, but they ended up later arresting him. And then when they went to trial, they arrested his wife and took his daughter. But after the trial started, then they let her go. So they were worried about them committing suicide. That was their main point. They really weren't worried about proving they were crazy or whatever. That wasn't the main reason they hired the psychiatrist. It was just to monitor them and make sure they're stable and they're not gonna kill themselves or whatever like that. But at the end of the movie, H2 Hitler second ended up committing suicide anyway. He took a cyanide pill because he didn't want to die, as a common criminal being hanged. He didn't want that imagery of himself out there. So after they hired the psychiatrist, he came in, and the American translator was a Jew born in Germany, but he escaped Germany before they start killing all the Jews, and so he joined the army and became a translator. So he spoke perfect German. So he was a translator for H2 Hitler second. So when the psychiatrist came, the first thing he did was talk to the American military chief or whatever, and then he went to talk to the H2 Hitler second, and he used the translator. So the psychiatrist thought that he couldn't speak English at first when he first saw him, and then he called him fat, and he noticed that the H2 had a reaction, like he could tell, what he was saying. And then after he was finished talking to him, he told the translator, he was like, he speaks English. And the translator was like, I've been talking in front of this guy for 3 months in English, thinking he couldn't understand the language. So he was saying whatever he was saying about him. And the translator asked him, like, how can you tell he could speak English? And the psychiatrist was like, when he called him fat, he looked a certain way. He could tell, that he understood what he was saying. So the translator was like, okay, are you going to let him know that he understands? And the translator was like, no, he's just going to let him open whenever he decides to start speaking English, which he did eventually after he had a heart attack, and the psychiatrist saved him from dying, gave him CPR or whatever. And then he told the psychiatrist, thank you. And then he started talking in English. So the psychiatrist knew that these Nazis were narcissists, right? So he asked the translator to take him to a library in Germany to find books written about all these Nazis or whatever, so he could get some information about them and know what questions to ask or whatever he was trying to figure out about them. And the psychiatrist was keeping notes, and then eventually he wrote a book and he published it. By the end of the movie, he had published it. So once they decided they was gonna take the Nazis to trial, the high command, they had to get it approved by Congress and get all the support, the political support. So at first, the American Congress didn't want to do it. The American president didn't want to do it. So one of the guys from the military or the psychiatrist or whoever, they went to the Pope to get his blessing, and the Pope at first said no, he didn't want nothing to do with it. He didn't want to acknowledge it or whatever. And the psychiatrist asked him about when he acknowledged the the legitimacy of the Third Reich or whatever Hitler's government was called back in the 1930s or whatever when it first started, and the Pope had gave him recognition like legitimacy or whatever. So then he told the Pope like, if you don't acknowledge that the Nazis were evil, people gonna look at the Catholic Church funny. So then the Pope changed his mind, said, he'll support the tribunal because this was a new thing. It was never done before. Like charging somebody from another country in court, that's wasn't never done before at that time. Not in like modern history with the countries today, like France and Britain and Russia and America and Germany and all the modern day countries or whatever. So it's a lot of dialogue. It's a lot of talking throughout the movie. A lot of nuances. I can't really um, um, summarize all of it, but basically this is what happened. So Hitler's second H2, he told the psychiatrist that he wasn't gonna get hanged. Basically he was saying he was gonna beat the trial. You know, and he had a good argument. He knew how to play stupid and whatever. Say he didn't know about the Nazi camps and what they were doing to the Jews or whatever. Because he's high ranking, so he's not there at the camps or whatever. So he can kind of play stupid and act like he didn't know what was going on or whatever. So he had a argument he could make, and so after a while, the psychiatrist he started getting to know the the, the H2 Hitler too, and he talked to the other high command Nazi people too in the movie, but the main focus of the movie was on H2, on Hitler's second command. The other people, they only showed brief interactions of the psychiatrist talking to the other Nazis, the high command or whatever. But the majority of the movie was focused on Hitler's second, the H2 guy, whatever his name is in German. I don't know how to pronounce it. And so after a while, H2, Hitler's second, told the psychiatrist to give a letter to his wife and daughter. And the psychiatrist, he went to go see the wife and the daughter, and they were cordial with each other. And the wife, he had left. He had started to leave. He walked out the door, and the wife ran out after him and told him, to give the letter to Hitler's second, H2. So uh, Rudolf Hitler's third, H3, when they arrested him after they arrested all the other guys, and he saluted H2, Hitler's second, when he saw him in prison, and then they talked to each other for a couple minutes or whatever, and then they talked to each other in front of the psychiatrist and all the other American military. And Rudolph, H3, Hitler's third, he was claiming he couldn't remember nothing. So he said he couldn't remember who H2, Hitler's second, was. And H2, Hitler's second, told the psychiatrist that H3 was lying, Rudolph, because when he first came into prison, he saluted, the Nazi salute to H2, and he told him, H2 told the psychiatrist, like, you saw how he saluted him when he first came to the prison, but all of a sudden he can't remember who he is, so he's lying. He didn't lose his memory, Rudolph, H3. And I think that's the only time they really showed him in a movie other than after they got sentenced guilty, when they was before they came in to give him a death sentence to kill him. They showed him for a brief moment just acting out or whatever. I forget at the end because I kind of got him mixed up which one was which because they only showed them for brief moments, so it was kind of hard for me to remember whose face was who or whatever, like, you know. But it was like, as far as the high command, I think it was like 7 or 8 of them or something like that that they showed. It might have been more or less, but something around there. It wasn't like 50 of them or nothing like that. So then once they approved the tribunal, all the Nazis, all the high command, they were in the prison, and the army lawyer, the military lawyer, he gave the indictment papers to all the Nazis. They served them their papers or whatever, what they were charged with and whatever, and then they gave him a lawyer, and then one of the Nazis, he asked for a Jewish lawyer. The lawyer, the American came in, gave him his lawyer his papers or whatever. The Nazi, and he told him to be in charge, and then the Nazi said he wants a Jewish lawyer. I thought that was kind of funny. And then another one of the Nazis, once he gave him the papers, the American lawyer gave him his papers, and he had started acting out. He said, just shoot me, don't charge me like a common criminal. And he was just yelling and acting out, just lost his mind, he's like, just shoot me, he's like, don't charge me, like a regular person, because he's high command Nazi, he's a wartime person, I guess he wants to die in honor or whatever. So then the psychiatrist, he met the army lawyer at the Nazi stadium where Hitler gave his speech, or I think it was, Hitler and Hitler second. They gave speeches and they announced all this, the laws that were changing in Germany, what they were going to do to the Jews or whatever like that. And the lawyer asked the psychologist to give give him some inside information, how were they going to defend themselves in court, because they're taking them to trial, so technically the psychiatrist has a patient, confidentiality between the patient or whatever. I guess they have those laws in Germany too. And he kind of argued with it. At first he didn't agree to it because he said, he shouldn't be telling whatever personal business about H2 or whatever, the Nazis, even though he was writing a book and he was gonna write a book about it anyway. So to me, it don't make no sense to me why he even argued that. Man, he's an American, so then the lawyer told him, the reason why it was important to win this trial. And then the psychiatrist asked the lawyer, he's like, why don't you just shoot him and kill him, And then the lawyer explained, why they wanted to put it on trial and to show the world, to document that the Nazis were evil, And so Hitler's second, H2, he was in charge of the Air Force, the commander of the Air Force or whatever. And he claimed he didn't know the Jews were being killed in the work camps because H3 or H4 or whichever one of those other guys was the head of the Secret Service who was in charge of the work camps. So technically, H2, Hitler's second, he wasn't really involved in the day-to-day stuff going on in the work camps, even though he probably knew he was just lying, playing stupid or whatever. But on paper, he could make that argument because he wasn't going to these places physically, He's second under Hitler, so he's at the office. So wherever, he's not going to no little camps all out throughout the country or whatever, And so one of the high command Nazis, they committed suicide in prison. He hanged himself, or however he did it, and this was before the trial started. So after that, that's when the American started to get more. That's when they hired another psychologist or psychiatrist or whichever to monitor the Nazis because they didn't want them to kill themselves. They wanted to take them to trial and prove whatever. So after one of the guys killed himself, because the psychiatrist, he was supposed to catch on to that if something was wrong. That's what he was there for, to be able to tell if if these guys are stressed out or if they couldn't handle whatever, going to trial or whatever like that. So they hired another psychologist. So Hitler's second H2, he told the psychiatrist, uh, it's a lot of dialogue when they was talking, and so one part he told the psychologist that his uncle was having sex with his mother, and he remembered it when he was a child because he was living with his uncle because his father, whatever happened with his family, they had to move in with his uncle, and H2 was still a child at the time, and he said the uncle was rich, so he let the family move in, and his mother stayed in the bedroom upstairs next door to the uncle's bedroom, and his father stayed in the bedroom downstairs while they were staying at his uncle's house. And he told the psychiatrist how his uncle was having sex with his mother. So it was a lot of dialogue like that in the movie where they was just getting personal and talking about stuff. That's what the psychiatrist was doing, like analyzing him and getting to know him personal, whatever. So that kind of he told him that to prove a point to him that just because somebody is your friend or whatever don't mean just because they're your ally don't mean you're your friend. It was a point he was trying to make about people will backstab you or do stuff behind your back or so whatever like that basically. So the 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 American translator for the German, he was a soldier, the American soldier. He asked the psychiatrist why he talks to the Nazis without him anymore, because all of them spoke English. They weren't stupid, so they could speak English perfectly, and so after a while, the psychiatrist he would just talk to all the Nazis by himself. At first, he was using the translator, but the translator asked him like, why you not taking me into your meetings anymore or whatever, and then the psychiatrist told him like, it was late or whatever, or they speak English, so he doesn't need a translator or whatever like that. And then the translator was, implied that he thought, he was trying to help the Germans or the Nazis or whatever. So right before the trial started, the H2 Hitler second, he got comfortable with the psychiatrist, and he told him the statement he was gonna make in court. So the psychiatrist gave the statement he was gonna make in court to the American lawyer, and then the lawyer, at the start of the trial, when he was gonna make the statement, he struck it down. Basically, he told the judge like, we don't want to allow no remarks or whatever from the suspects or whatever. So basically, they cut him off from making a statement, and that's when H2 Hitler second knew that the psychiatrist was telling his personal information to the American lawyers, which shouldn't be a surprise. I mean, he knew that the psychiatrist was an American, so I don't know why he thought that he was gonna help him. So the psychiatrist. He was taking letters from H2 to his wife, going back and forth a few times. So the last time he went there, right before the trial started, or right after, which I forget exactly. The psychologist, he went to the H2 Hitler's two wife house. And she wasn't there, and the Americans took her, and the furniture was thrown out outside. All the, so you could tell somebody went in through the house and just tore the house up. And it was a guy standing outside, and the psychiatrist asked the guy like, where'd the lady go? And the guy told him the Americans took her. I think the translator asked him in German, and he translated it or whatever. So then when they got back to the base, the psychiatrist asked the American lawyer, where they take H2's wife, and then the lawyer told him that they arrested her and the daughter. And then the lawyer asked the psychiatrist, like, how did he know where his wife was, H2 wife was? And I don't think he told him how he found out or whatever. So after that, the psychiatrist, he went back to H2 Hitler's second, and he didn't tell him that his wife was arrested. And then H2 asked the psychiatrist if his wife had wrote any letter, because usually they'll write a letter back and forth each time they go see him. So the psychiatrist, he said no, she didn't write no letter. And then H2 asked him, like, no, she didn't write a letter, because usually they'll write a letter back and forth. So then while they were talking in the movie, the other psychologist came into the cell, in the prison cell, while they were talking, and he told H2 that his wife had got arrested. So then, now that the H2 know that the psychiatrist is just lying to him, because he already thought something was funny with that she didn't write a letter back to him or whatever. So after that, he went out, he left, and he went to talk to the other psychologist, and he said, why'd you tell him that his wife just got arrested, because that might make him want to commit suicide or some shit, So the other psychologist, the second psychologist, told the original psychologist, whatever, it doesn't matter, So then they fought, just a quick little fight, a little 2-minute fight, and the guards broke it up. So the army lawyer, he was angry, because he's like, why y'all psychiatrists, y'all professionals, like, why are y'all fighting or whatever, over something silly like that. And then I thought this part was kind of funny. He was like yelling, the army guys, like, you're professionals or whatever. He was yelling all this shit, and then he asked the original psychologist, the first one. He's like, he asked him, do you want me to press charges against him? And then the psychologist said no, and then he said, get the fuck out my he said, get out of my office then, So he was like mad, So another part of the dialogue, when the psychiatrist was talking to the H2 Hitler second, this was after the trial started, because they had showed footage of the Jews getting killed in the Nazi camps, being thrown into ovens, burnt alive, and all this shit they was doing to them. So the psychiatrist, he came into H2's prison cell to talk with him, and he basically was telling him he didn't believe him, that he didn't know that was going on, because that's what H2 was saying, that he didn't know what was going on with the Jews, that they were being killed and slaughtered or whatever. So the psychiatrists, they started arguing about when the Americans bombed the Japanese, and H2, he's like, what the fuck you think war is? People kill each other during war or whatever. So he compared it to like the Americans bombing Hiroshima in Japan, and he made a good point that I would argue is probably like the most out of all the dialogue, all the talking they was doing in the movie. This probably the most. I'm not gonna say most important, but it stood out to me. It was a interesting argument. So the H2 Hitler second, he was saying, Alexander the Great and all these war heroes that are known from thousands of years ago, whatever. Basically, he was saying, who knows what they could have done? They could have did all types of brutal, underhanded stuff, but you don't know. Is whoever writes the story or whatever. And when you're gonna glorify somebody like Alexander the Great or whoever, you're not gonna say he was raping people or having people raped and killed or whatever the fuck was going on, because they went to war. So it's an old saying, all is fair is in love and all is fair in love and war. So that's his point he was making to the psychiatrist. Like, what do you think war is? People kill each other and do all types of underhanded stuff. It's not no pretty fair fight like a boxer. Like when boxers fight and the referee, it's war. So there's all types of stuff going on. So that was the point he was trying to make. And the psychiatrist was saying, bombing Japan wasn't like comparable to what Hitler did to Nazis or whatever like that. So they argued about that. But it was an interesting point he made, like I said, about Alexander the Great. All these people that you don't know what else they did back then. Is who knows what happened back then, whatever. And he mentioned somebody else, I can't remember, the guy from France, Napoleon. Or no, that was he didn't mention Napoleon. Some other guy he mentioned, I forget. Um, so then something about the psychiatrist, the first psychiatrist, got published in the paper, in the German newspaper. I forget what it was, and then he gets fired by the American lawyer, and then the American lawyer, he tells the psychiatrist that they released the wife and the child, because it wasn't necessary to keep her arrested. Hitler's second wife, H2's wife and his child, they released him from prison or whatever. I guess they just arrested him to make sure they weren't gonna plot no assassination or try and get him to escape or some shit like that. So after he get fired, the psychiatrist, he go to the train station. He about to leave Germany. He's talking with the translator, and that's when the translator told him, he was a Jew born in Germany. Then he left and went to America, and then you know, and then he joined the army or whatever, the military, and then that's how he spoke German and whatever like that. So he was crying. It was an emotional talk they was having. Personal talk. And then he was telling the psychiatrist, like, you gotta help, with this child to get these people, because the psychiatrist told the lawyer, like, you probably not gonna win this trial, because the Nazis, they not stupid. They know how to argue in court and play stupid or whatever like that. At least H2. The rest of them, maybe they could have got him easily, but H2 was kind of hard. So you needed some kind of insider information, or some way to get him to confess he knew about the killings or whatever. And basically the psychiatrist has told the lawyer, like, this guy's gonna win this trial. So then that's what the translator was saying, like, you gotta help win this trial, whatever. So after that, the psychiatrist, he didn't leave Germany, but he didn't tell the translator. So he changed his mind, and he came back to the lawyer. He gave the lawyer his notes, and he said, here's all the notes I had on the Nazis, all the little interviews he did with them or whatever. And then the lawyer asked him, like, why you got all these notes? And the psychiatrist told him he was going to write a book about Nazis or whatever. So they're showing the trial, right? And then the American lawyer, he's asking. On the trial, they only showed him question H2, Hitler second. They didn't show all the other Nazis. That would have been a long-ass movie if they would have did all that. But so they was focusing on Hitler second, on H2. And he was just asking questions about Austria and whatever is going on in Europe or whatever at the time before the Nazis took command and started killing people or whatever like that, you know. And it was real like softball questions, nothing that really implied H2's guilt. You know, he was just like just random questions that really didn't prove that he knew that the Jews were being killed or whatever like that, right? So then the Brit, because it's a tribunal, so they got the British lawyer and the Russian or whoever else there. So then the British lawyer tells him, you know, I want to ask some questions. And I thought this part was kind of funny. It was so then the judge, he said, you know, I thought only the Americans were gonna be asking questions, you know. So then the Americans like, we always, you know, that's I forget the exact words he's saying, but basically it's like, you know, he's like, no, we're always glad to let our friends from Great Britain assist us or whatever it say. He said something like that, you know. But you know, he called them like friends from Great Britain or whatever he said. It's kind of funny the way he said it. So the British lawyer in the movie basically won the trial. You know, if it was up to the American, H2 probably would have got off not guilty. So then the British lawyer came up and he asked him, you know, if he asked him a few questions, but the last question he asked him was, if you would have known, well, knowing what he knows now about what happened to the Jews getting killed or whatever, would he have still, does he regret, you know, being in the Nazis, being under Hitler? And then the H2, Hitler second, he said no, and he said hail Hitler or whatever, because you know they have to show loyalty to the Third Reich or Nazis or whatever, you know. And I think in the movie they were referring to as the Führer. Some people just say Hitler. Some people say the Führer. I guess the Führer is the German word for the head of the Nazis or whatever. I don't know. I'm not sure exactly what all the words mean or whatever. So then after that, it was like kind of like an outrage in the courtroom, and then after that, you know, they knew they won the trial because H2 basically admitted, you know, he still would have stayed in with the Nazis with Hitler, even after knowing all the killings and the murders and all that stuff, right? And so after the trial, so after the question, the psychiatrist, he went into the prison cell to talk to H2, and you know, he was just telling him goodbye or confronting him or whatever about whatever with the Jews or whatever. So the H2, Hitler second, you know, he asked the psychiatrist if he was helping with the trial, and he knew it already. And so they were found, all of them were found guilty, and you know, they sentenced, they was gonna hang him and kill him. So the very next day, like soon as they found him guilty, the next day they was gonna hang him and kill him, whatever. So you know, they went in and took him in. They showed I think they showed in the movie, they showed like just one guy getting hanged. They didn't show they showed like one or two of them getting hanged. And then H2, Hitler second, he took a cyanide pill. So he committed suicide or whatever because he didn't want to get hanged. It was it was gonna be recorded or whatever, filmed or whatever. So he didn't want to die like that. Made a mockery of or whatever you want to call it, I guess. So after that, the psychiatrist went back to America, and this is based on like obviously it's based on you know true story. Not all the details was in there or whatever like that, but it's a pretty good movie overall. You get the general idea of what. So the psychiatrist, he wrote a book about the Nazis, and then he was on an interview on the radio, and he was arguing with the people on the radio, saying, you got people like all types of people that are like Nazis all over the world. It's not just a German thing. You got people with the same mentality that Nazis have all over the world. Because he's a psychiatrist, so he understands people and stuff. So that's what he was explaining. He's like even in America, whatever country you want to name, you got people that got the mentality of a Nazi. Basically, it's not you know something that's unique to the Germans specifically. You got people with this kind of mentality all over the world. Whatever you want to call it, a Nazi or whatever you want to use to describe it, people have this type of mentality. And that's what the psychiatrist was arguing with the guy on the radio, because he had psychoanalyzed all these Nazis. He had spent a lot of time talking to him or whatever like that. So then at the end of the movie, it shows some little text, or not text, but statement, final statement about what happened to the psychologist. The book didn't sell a lot of copies. Obviously, Americans gonna be offended that you would compare them to a Nazi, or imply that people in America could be like Nazis or whatever like that. I don't remember all the text they wrote at the end of the movie on the screen, but basically it was describing what happened to the psychologist, and his book didn't sell, whatever like that. And then that's it. That's the end of the movie. It don't look like they're gonna do a sequel to it, or uh, whatever. But like I said, it's until the world ends, you're never gonna stop hearing about the Holocaust. That's not like a bad thing, but this is something the Jews are always gonna talk about till the world ends. 500 years from now, they'll still be writing books and making movies about the Holocaust and the Nazis. There's so many ways you could analyze. Is this the situation? It's a significant part of history, just like with black people. And 500 years from now, until the world ends or whenever, black Americans, they always gonna be talking about slavery. So that's it. Nuremberg, and I forget the guys' names in the movie. And I saw it at the theater. It wasn't too crowded, So I guess this movie ain't that popular or whatever. But it was. I thought it was interesting. So that's it. Nuremberg.